Hey there, Women of Welcome. Bree Stensrud here. We have a new report from the National Association of Evangelicals and World Relief that are highlighting some of the incredibly precarious and heartbreaking situations that we are going to be seeing happen to families. I'm going to be talking with Matthew Sorens. Matthew Sorens, here you are. Matt and I are going to be talking today really just about what this report means. Matt, ask again if that didn't work. There we go. We're going to talk about what this report means. Brand new report, just about, we all know what is happening to immigrant families in this country in terms of either no due process or delayed due process or unjust detention and detainment. We are seeing families being separated, but now we have a new study from the National Association of Evangelicals and World Relief that is telling us really the scope of what could really happen if we continue along down this path. That many of us have already experienced and know is absolutely devastating families around the country. So, Matt, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Bree. We appreciate you drawing attention to this.
Yeah, so this new report called Brought Together or Joined Together, Torn Apart, How U.S. Immigration Policies Are Separating Families. Matt, walk us through what some of the research found, because we're looking at numbers that are, one of them is up in 900,000 in terms of families being separated. Tell us a little bit about what this report found if we continue down this trajectory of mass deportations.
Yeah, so what we wanted to do with this report, first of all, it's because for us at World Relief and our parent organization, the National Association of Evangelicals, obviously, as Christians, we care about family. Like, we believe God established family. And we think it should be a very rare situation when the government is splitting a family apart. Obviously, there could be situations when that's necessary to protect children or that sort of thing, or when someone commits a horrific crime. But generally speaking, we think that the ideal situation is for children to be raised by their mom and their dad in a healthy situation, and we don't want to see government messing with that. I mean, even to the words of Jesus, looking at marriage in particular, like what God has joined together, human beings, human institutions should not be tearing apart. So we really wanted to understand, we know, at least on an anecdotal level, that families are being split apart by some of the immigration enforcement that's happening. And then not only like detention and deportation in the United States, but also when families are stopped from being reunited. For example, when you shut down refugee resettlement, when you restrict immigrant visa processing overseas. But we wanted to get a sense of what is the scale that we're talking about. So we actually worked with a researcher named Philip Connor, who's someone who he worked actually for the Pew Research Center on immigration issues. He worked for the Southern Baptist Convention's North American Mission Board before that. Obviously a believer. And we wanted to understand, for the best we could estimate, what would be the scale of family separation. And when we talk about family separation, we're primarily talking about mixed status families, where you can deport, or the government could deport one member of the family because they are either undocumented, they have no legal status, or they have a temporary legal status that the government could take away, which is, of course, what we've seen in
Okay.
many cases in the last year. But then you have at least one other family member who is a U.S. citizen or is a lawful permanent resident and can't be deported under the law.
Right.
And so how many families are we talking about? What's the scale of deportation? What we did is basically use the administration's stated goal, which they've repeated as recently as a couple weeks ago, of trying to deport 1 million people per year, and then
Right.
extrapolated what would that mean for families. And so the numbers are really stark. Overall, it'd be about 1.3 million U.S. citizen family members affected. That breaks down to about 910,000 U.S. citizen minor children who would be separated from at least one of their parents. Most of them would probably be separated from both parents, but in some cases just one. Another 272,000 spouses, so marriages where a U.S. citizen spouse would be separated from a non-citizen spouse. And then looking beyond the detention deportation dynamic, but to families who are already abroad, but are who we would expect to be able to be reunited if it weren't for a shutdown of visa processing in particular countries. It's another 150,000 spouses and minor children of U.S. citizens. So that adds up to about 1.3 million families. And I should say, sometimes that's a temporary separation. Sometimes, dad is deported, the whole family can go back to the dad's country of origin and live together there. Sometimes that's possible. But even still, it usually involves at least a temporary separation that can be very traumatic. Sometimes that's really not possible. I mean, when you have a dad, let's say, or a mom being deported to a country like Haiti or like Afghanistan, And then, I mean, the U.S. government says that U.S. citizens should not travel to those countries because they're too dangerous. So if you're going to abide by that guidance, it means you can't live together in the same place. And even if you could, I mean, it puts a parent in this just horrible situation of, do I choose to live together but put my child at risk of violence, of lack of religious freedom, of extreme poverty, of disease? Or do I find an extended family member who will take care of them, or a family friend, or a friend from church, or sometimes even the foster care system, which unfortunately we've seen reports of a really dramatic spike in the number of kids going into foster care because their parents have been detained or deported.
I mean, as we're talking about this, I can hear my own kids as I've shut them out of this room, and I can
Mine
hear
too.
your kids as well. As Matt and I were thinking about, all right, when do we do this and timing, we were both right before this, like, all right, we're shutting our kids in the other room so that we can talk about this. And it just reminded me as I'm hearing my own and hearing yours in the background, just you're mentioning over 900,000 kids could be separated from one or both parents. And this is completely preventable. This is completely preventable. And I think you and I have said this so many times, but it bears repeating just so that we put it in the right context. And that is, of course, we have to enforce immigration laws. Of course, we want people to come and do things through the a legal process. We want them to do that. We also believe in safe and secure borders. We also believe in deporting the worst of the worst. This is not what this report is highlighting. What this report is highlighting is that with all of those things in context and in place, and all of those things being said and true, this is still a reality
Yeah,
for so many families who are desperately trying to do it the right way, or who have legal status, or who came here legally and now have their status revoked, or they're in a process of legalizing or getting more durable status. You have a lot of families who have married and joined together, and they're in a process and they're waiting. And as you wait in a really backlog system, even if you wait 4 years or 10 years on average to get those systems fully adjudicated or approved, a lot of life happens in
yeah,
in 4 years and 6 years and 10 years. Then you have U.S. citizen children. Wouldn't you? The complex nature of all of this, it's not just so simple as, well, come the legal way and your family won't be separated. And if you don't want your family to be separated, then just deport together. Like, talk a little bit about why that is not so simply stated.
yeah. I mean, I think uh, it is so much more complex than that, and I appreciate that people want to simplify situations, but I mean, we actually tell some stories in the report of situations where this has been very complex. For example, you have Venezuelans who came, as most people know, the government in Venezuela has been horrific for a number of years now, and with that, a terrible economy where families couldn't feed themselves, also persecution in some cases. So a lot of Venezuelans fled, and a lot of them were actually allowed in by the Biden administration. Whether you think that was right or wrong, that was the federal government's decision to allow some of those people in. And then the Trump administration very abruptly terminated legal protections for Venezuelans, some with temporary protected status, some with humanitarian parole. And then we tell the story in the report of actually a number of Venezuelan families, this particularly in Midland, Texas, who were where a Venezuelan mother or father was very quickly detained and deported, leaving behind children. And in some cases, they're children who had actually come with them. In other cases, they're U.S. citizens who were born since they've been here in the last few years. And where that gets particularly complicated is the U.S. does not have a diplomatic relationship with Venezuela. So there's not a Venezuelan consulate you can go to go get your Venezuelan passport as even if under Venezuelan law they might recognize you as a Venezuelan national along with a U.S. national because you have your Venezuelan parent to do that. And then you can't have, as a U.S. citizen, so we have situations where we have pastors who've taken in Venezuelan kids whose parents actually would like to be reunited with them, even though that's a hard decision to have them go to Venezuela. But it's not possible until you can get the travel documents, and it's been months. And in a few cases, they've been able to make that reunification happen. In other cases, they've been working for months to try to do that unsuccessfully. And I mean, that's just one example, but you have that playing out over and over again. I also think, I mean, I think it is really important to underscore your point, Bree, that we're not saying like deportation is always wrong. When someone commits a violent crime, for example, that's a case where I think most Americans agree that it's appropriate, even if it's still sad for children who are left behind or a spouse who's left behind. But that makes sense for public safety. But we actually we did the analysis. I mentioned current projections. Could be more than 900,000 children who would lose at least one parent if we just deported individuals convicted of a violent crime. It would be 13,000 children who would lose one or both parents. Now that's still hard for those 13,000 kids, and I think actually the role of the church in standing with those children and spouses who are left behind is really important. But there are those cases where that might be necessary. But there's that delta between 900,000 and 13,000, which are the cases where there's not a violent criminal conviction involved. And yet we're talking about taking a child from one or possibly both of their parents. And I just think most Americans, and certainly most Christians, believe that there ought to be a better way. And maybe there is a penalty. Some of these people did come into the country unlawfully. Maybe there's a fine to pay for having done so. That's the sort of legislation that we've supported at World Relief for a long time, that the NAE, our parent organization, has supported for a long time. We're not saying that violation of law was fine. There's no penalty. But
Right,
we're saying
right.
given these important values of, yes, wanting to honor the law, there's biblical reasons for that, and also wanting to protect the integrity of the family, which we know from polling is a priority for 90% of evangelical Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to do both? And we think there really is, but it would actually take Congress acting to make that sort of a restitution-based legalization possible. And then I do think it's important to say that there's also a lot of people who entered lawfully, who have not violated any laws, who very abruptly had their legal status taken from them, who are also affected by this as well.
I mean, I just want to highlight the number 13,000 versus 900, almost a million. So if we really do want to hold to the worst of the worst, okay, that's 13,000. We could avoid the trauma of this incredible gap. 900,000, like if you are involved at all in your local community in loving on and supporting vulnerable families or vulnerable children, and you've been in the foster care system, or you've been in the adoption space, or you've been in the unhoused and homelessness space, you know that these are really, really overburdened spaces. And so you know that the U.S. foster care system is already just full and has dramatic needs of families entering into this. And so this is, to me, it seems like a catastrophe that absolutely can and must be avoided. And Christians should be at the forefront of understanding this and then advocating against it. And so one of the things, if you drop the comment family in the comment section here, you're going to be connected to the advocacy link that's going to give you all of the information you need to make a call to your congressional leaders. None of this changes. Like, this is the path that we're on. I think this is what we have to be clear on. This is the path that is set before us. This is what is going to happen unless you decide that your voice is going to stand in the way of it. And nothing changes without your voice. So I think that's important for us to know. It's not like these are numbers that are like, oh, it could potentially, like, fictionally be like, this is going to happen if the administration continues down what they propose is going to happen to fulfill the goals that they have. So it is us that must stand in the gap and say, this cannot happen. This is unnecessary. And it's inhumane. So if we as Christians are pro-life, we're pro-family, we're pro-marriage, these are the things that we actually have to speak up and say, no, these are the values that not only Christians have, but that Americans have, and that we know that human flourishing happens within the bounds of a family, within the bounds of a healthy marriage, these kinds of things. What else? What is something else that we need to make sure that people know about this that would be helpful? I want you to make sure you drop the word family in comments so that you can get that link that will help you. But what's the last thing you think people should know about this, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, there was actually a report that came out just yesterday. So since we released this report a few days ago, that just from the limited data that's available, and not all states track this, so it's a limited data set, but the number of kids placed in foster care in the United States in fiscal year 2025 because of parents being detained or deported increased by 49% from the year before. And that's fiscal year 2025, which is not all of, like, that was partially the previous administration as well. I would suspect that by the time we get fiscal year 2026, we're going to see that number go dramatically up even further. And I mean, in that adoption foster space, I think it's also important to know. I mean, we also mentioned the families who are in the process of reunification, that's been halted for 75 countries around the world. All immigrant visa processing has been halted, and that at least initially also included intercountry adoptions. So families who are in a process of an international adoption, and after a lot of good advocacy, the State Department has said, well, they will consider individual exceptions in the case of adoption. But that's really not good enough. And a lot of the Christian organizations that work on international adoption have said that's really not acceptable. And we certainly agree. And frankly, we also would say you should not have a ban on biological children, minor children, being brought from their U.S. citizen parents. I mean, this shouldn't actually matter if you're adopted or biological children. You want children to be with their parents. And that's why our laws have that process for reunification.
Yeah.
This is people who filed petitions for their kids who are stuck in a different country so they can get the visa and come join them here. And that process is completely halted, no matter how compelling your story is, for 75 countries around the world. It's roughly half of the world's population is affected by this ban right now.
Okay, so folks, we know what we need to do to stand in the gap, and we know that we could actually stop this. I know sometimes people will say, I don't know if my voice actually really matters in this. My representative is completely this way. My representative doesn't listen to this, or, oh, my representative is already on board with this. I don't need to advocate. What we will tell you is that courage begets courage, media begets media, voice begets voice. And so you have to be a voice, no matter where your representative is on this, so that they have a heightened sense of awareness about what's going on. It's Politicians don't know everything. Your elected official doesn't know everything. And you don't have to know everything either to advocate for this. If you comment family, you're going to be connected to the advocacy link that's going to give you language. It's going to give you all of these stats that we just told you. This is a new report called Joined Together, Torn Apart, and it is done by the NAE and World Relief. And we can prevent the trauma of this happening to almost 900,000 children and their families. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining us. I know Nicole from our team just dropped some links in the chat as well, so feel free to look at that. But we need your voice today on this, folks, and we appreciate you tuning in.
Yeah, thank you, Ray.
Thanks, everyone.